Oh yeah, sorry. Recording of this meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. The recording of this meeting will remain online for 4 years, and if you are present in the chamber, you are consenting to appear in the recording and broadcast, which may also be used for training purposes. Okay, so we'll just run down the agenda in order today. Apologies, we've got from Yarrow, but we have a sub, Councillor Ackroyd. Okay, anybody got any declarations of interest in any of the items on the agenda? Okay, for those of us that were here, which is only a few of us, Councillor Hilton and Williams, are happy to sign off the meetings of the previous meeting? Yeah. Public questions? Not had any, have we? Nope. We've not had any petitions or deputations. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, review of members' allowance.
This report is a follow-on report picking up some issues that we identified in our major report, but which we indicated we would want to have a look at just to see if we could come back to you, the council, with some further recommendations. As far as the basic allowance is concerned, we have looked at the formula that was adopted in 2015, recognising that some aspects of that formula, in fact all aspects of that formula, were really sort of out of date. We wanted to see if we could apply a more local employment figure. We felt that the formula contained a number of hours per week, which we felt was quite inadequate given the present circumstances, and the percentage discount which the government believes we should take into account by having a certain percentage of hours unremunerated. We felt that percentage was too high. However, looking at those elements and trying to come up with a formula that used those elements and yet came up with a figure that you would find acceptable proved rather difficult. So in the light of that, for the moment, we have simply decided to recommend the original recommendation that we made last year should stand, and we will keep it under review, but we have made a recommendation with regard to any future flat rate awards to officers that there is a basis there for you to apply that increase or adjustment to members' allowances. The second issue we looked at was the Deputy Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And again, although we felt there should be some parity with Deputy Chair roles, we felt that didn't apply necessarily to this particular Deputy Chair role. Nothing to do with individuals, it was to do with the degree of knowledge and understanding that we felt the post required. And our conclusion was, in view of the refocusing of the statutory function that your council is going through at the moment, it would be inappropriate for us to make a recommendation about this particular Deputy Chair allowance at the present time. The main part of our recommendations to you relate to the allowance for political group leaders. We were quite wedded to the principle that all political group leaders, irrespective of group size, had an important and possibly equal role to play in the good governance of the council. And we felt that on that basis, every group leader of a group of 2 and more, up to 19, should have a common standard allowance to reflect their role in the good governance of the council, supplemented by a variable amount according to group size. Now, we've come up with a set of figures and bandings for that variable allowance. We as a panel are more wedded to the principle than we are to the particular bandings. But we feel the bandings are appropriate and can be applied to any future political composition of the council. And our recommendation is that for both leaders and deputy group leaders, that the principle of governance plus an element for group size should be the way to calculate group leader allowances in the future. And then finally, we looked at dependent care allowances in particular, but all of the dependent care expenses that councillors were entitled to claim. We, along with other panels in the region, have been really concerned at the low take-up of the entitlements that councillors have to expenses, particularly with regard to dependent care allowances. There are various reasons for this across the region. In particular, in another place, the panel on which I serve received evidence that councillors don't put forward claims for expenses because they are published at the end of the financial year. They are published and named as to the expenses they've claimed. And quite often, those councillors can be pilloried in the local press for claiming expenses to which they are entitled. Now, we're not going to resolve that issue, but what we have done is recommended to you that the allowances be upgraded to a more realistic figure, thus hopefully removing a particular barrier that might exist. But of course, there are many other factors which are beyond our control, and it is, of course, up to individual members as to whether or not they claim. But together, those are the recommendations that we are offering to you for recommendation on to the council. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions from anybody? Councillor Hilton.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at the figures on the different size of political groups. Oh, it was on. It's on. On the different sizes of political groups, you've got 5 to 2, 12 to 6, and 13 to 19. I'd have chosen 2 to 4, 5 to 11, and 12 to 19. I wonder whether the panel chair could tell me how he came to those figures on the size of political groups and remuneration for the leaders.
Permutations, as I say, we're not particularly wedded to these precise bandings. It seemed to us that anything above 19, that the group leader and the deputy leader were likely to be the leader of the council and the deputy leader of the council. So 19 was the sort of the logic for the top figure. No, I mean, as I say, we're not wedded to these particular bandings. If you were more comfortable with slight variation to the bandings, we would not have any objection to that. It's more the principle of governance plus that we are wedded to, or would like to recommend to you.
Okay, thanks. We'll note that when we get to making a recommendation. Thanks. Other than that, the report seems fine and one that I would be happy to support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hilton. Anybody else indicating? No? Okay, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. It's not so much about the report, it was just the comments you were making about people not taking advantage, councillors not taking advantage. A lot of people don't realise, and I think it's a good moment to make sure that we have, certainly with upcoming elections, that candidates are aware beforehand, because often you don't know about these things until you actually become a councillor. Because I didn't even realise you got paid a payment or allowance when I first became a councillor, and I was surprised to get money for it. So I would like to just make it in the minutes that we do actually make sure that any people considering to be a councillor should be notified, and the group leaders, when they're selecting their candidates, they should make sure that information is passed on.
There's a role there for
Yeah.
political groups, part.
Yes, to encourage people to.
We have no problem with the quality of the induction material with councillors. Yes, of course, part of that induction must be an understanding of the allowances and the expenses that are there.
Okay, thank you. I know that the childcare allowances and things like that are not taken up very well widely, and I see in here you've changed the childcare allowance because I'm particularly because they'll probably rely on friends or family more so than an actual, especially as we're an evening authority. They're not likely to put their child in like an Ofsted nursery, and it makes sense that you've increased that to at least the minimum wage. But I'm sure that most of the councillors who have children probably just rely on their partners or friends to look after them for free, and like you say, never claim, which is, I mean, we do try and tell our group, don't we, Pwyn? And I'm sure you do the same with your group, but I'm bad at work with mileage expense. Unless it's a big amount, I can't be bothered. And I'm sure it might be similar with this. So I heard what Jeremy said about the banding. So given that this is going through into council, I don't particularly want to mess with the figures, but maybe in the when you run through the review in the future, you can, is it 2027 you next want to review this?
Yes, but we are on an annual
oh, no,
basis,
okay.
just check with you that it's something you want to raise with the panel. So we sort of monitor it on an annual basis. But the next full review will be 2027.
All right, thank you. So maybe then in next year's review, maybe you could have a look at some of the sizing of the group, and also by then we'll have an idea of the political makeup of the council and the groups, of course. If that makes sense, if Councillor Hilton happy?
Yeah, I'm not going to push the point. I think the thing is, the makeup of the groups we won't know until after the elections, and the workload is dependent, frankly, on whether the council's in no overall control or whether it's one party control, which is at the moment. So the workload on smaller group leaders or leaders of smaller groups gets harder and more difficult and more onerous when they're in no overall control and they've got the balance of power. So that does change it. So we just need to make sure that nobody's being unfairly treated when we get past the election. If somebody's got a smaller group but has got a higher workload than they might have in this council.
We do recognise that after May, you may be asking us to look at other details of the scheme that might better fit the makeup of the council post-May. But we're ready to do that if you request it. Thanks.
Okay, on that basis, with the notes that we've picked up from Councillor Williams and Councillor Hilton, I'm happy to accept the recommendations, and we'll pass them on to council next week, isn't it? Or the week after. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so shall we move on to review of polling district and places? Are you leading with this one, Tanya? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the process and the recommendations resulting from the Council's compulsory review of polling districts and polling places, which is required ahead of the next general election. The review follows the same process as previous reviews, but incorporates a greater emphasis on accessibility considerations as required by the Elections Act 2022. And a full assessment has been conducted of each existing and proposed polling station prior to determining the final recommendations. The assessment also considered whether the polling place has a suitable space to perform private voter ID checks, and when no space was identified, portable privacy screens will be purchased using the Elections Act funding. The other main focus of our review was to try and identify alternatives to any schools that we use as polling stations to try and reduce the disruption that this can cause. A public consultation took place, and the consultees that we contacted directly are listed in Appendix 2. The response was limited and no objections were received from the schools that we currently use, which is good news. But we were contacted by the Gloucestershire Sight Loss Council. This led to a meeting that we had with them, which provided us with really valuable information on the voting experience for blind and partially sighted voters, and highlighted opportunities to target our engagement that we'll be following up along with other neighbouring councils as well. So turning to the proposals, there are no changes proposed to polling district boundaries, but the returning officer is proposing to change 5 polling places, 3 of which are joint stations. Therefore, a total of 8 polling districts are affected by the proposed changes. Those changes are explained in detail in paragraphs 3.14 to 3.19, and in all cases, the ward councillors have been consulted, and those who responded confirmed their support for the proposed change. While we weren't able to find suitable alternatives for all the schools that we use as polling districts, 4 of the 5 proposed venue changes do move the polling station away from a school or an educational setting. In each case, the committee is asked to recommend to council a preferred polling station. If the proposals are accepted, a further interim review will take place after the May elections to implement any changes required by the review of the Gloucestershire County Council division boundary changes that will be implemented ahead of the County Council elections in 2025. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment that I'm pleased to see these proposals, because the disruption by closing a school is, it can be quite disastrous for families, people that are working and that, and it just causes so much upset. So I'm really pleased that some alternatives, particularly the Ukrainians Association, has been considered, so that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Nobody else? So we're happy with the recommendations and we'll pass them on to council? Yeah? Okay, thank you. And item 8, constitutional changes. Is that you? Sorry.
That will be me. So there are 3 main areas where we are proposing constitutional changes, Chair. How would you like me to deal with it? Do you want me to take them area by area or detail all 3 and then put them forward for discussion? They are 3 quite different areas.
Do them area by area.
So the first area of the Constitution we're looking to update and amend is changes to the Officer Code of Conduct. A track change version of the proposed new Code of Conduct against the existing is attached at Appendix 1B, but to highlight the changes, the original Code of Conduct referred to employees, and this has been replaced with references to officers to properly reflect the duties of officers as an elected the duties of officers to the council as an elected body, and to align with the member officer protocol that was adopted in July. There are further duties placed on officers that reciprocate those that are placed on members to act in a way that would maintain public confidence in the council as a whole and to provide support across the council. There are updates and clarifications on the expectations in relation to personal relationships between officers and members, and there's a reinforcement of the importance of not being under the influence of any substance that may impair an officer's ability to fulfil their role. One of the key changes that we are proposing to the Officer Code of Conduct is that the rules in relation to secondary employment will apply to all officers and not just those at grade F and above. This is because the council feels it owes a duty to take reasonable steps to protect the well-being of all its staff and officers and not just those at grade F and above. Any changes to this will be subject to agreement with the trade unions, and the meeting has been scheduled to discuss this with them. And finally, there are updates on the expectations of officers in relation to the use of council facilities and systems, as well as social media. That comes directly from experience and from 2 years ago, which I'm not going to refer to. Are there any questions on the proposed?
Just on you talking about officers and second jobs, just what's grade F?
Grade F, I might need to defer to my colleague.
It includes some team leaders, some just below team leader level, if that helps.
It is relatively senior.
Yeah.
in comparison to our neighbouring authorities and indeed to the county don't allow any of its officers to hold secondary employment. Other neighbouring authorities do require, effectively this is what it means is if you wish to have secondary employment, you need to ask for permission, and there will be very clear criteria as to when we will not grant that, and mostly it is about maintaining well-being. We don't want people to feel that they can work 100 hours a week over 2 jobs. So it is more about the welfare and how it will impact their role here.
Do we know if anybody does work more than 1 job already? Or is this going to impact?
There are officers who already hold 2 jobs, yes.
I just wonder how that works with somebody that might be on a fairly high level job share, or they're only working 3 days a week because they've got another job. So we might well get people doing that or who work for the city council.
So that would be, I mean, it won't be for me to make the decision, it will be for their line manager, but clearly if somebody comes on a job share, that will probably be part of their terms and conditions. The secondary employment policy would be secondary, clearly, to any signed contract between the city council and the employee.
Any other questions or comments on the conduct? No? Okay, so I know we've got other things to go through on this one, but is the committee happy to recommend the updated officer code of conduct to council? Yeah, okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is planning, my committee.
Your committee.
Please update me. I couldn't quite work out exactly what we're trying to change. This is my committee.
That's not ideal. So there are 5 main changes that we're proposing to the functions of the planning committee. These in the majority are clarifications rather than wholesale changes. The first is very simply a change in job titles, which reflects the current senior management structure at the council. So you have a head of service as your head of planning rather than a director. There is a proposal that whereas section 106 is required, that only requires the delivery of on-site affordable housing, they will not automatically be referred to committee. That doesn't affect off-site contributions. It is simply if we're saying you have to deliver 40% of the houses you're going to build on-site, there are no other contributions, that can be done under delegated powers. There is a proposal where a planning officer recommends, and this is, I had to think about this twice, where a planning officer recommends a change of use to a hot food takeaway and there have been no objections during the consultation period, that matter will not, as a matter of course, be brought to planning committee. So it's a recommendation for approval with no objections being received from any of the consultees. The request
Objections from consultees or objections from
objections from anybody.
Okay.
So
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on that point, objections from an elected member. If there's no other objections from members of the public or consultees, but if the elected member says, I want this to go before the planning committee, would that still be sufficient for it to go to
my understanding is it would be. This doesn't affect a ward member's rights to refer a decision to committee.
No, I get it. That won't because as members of your ward, as long as you get them in the consultation time, then they can come to committee with, as long as you have a valid planning reason. That's fine. And I suppose a ward member could just object to the planning application for a hot food takeaway, just as a member of the public anyway, and that would then bring it back. I think then I'm relatively comfortable with that. The section 106 one, I think I'm okay with.
Fine.
Large developments come
Yes.
as a matter of course anyway, and therefore I think I'm okay with that. Does anybody else have any comments on?
I'm afraid there are two more
Two more,
changes
come on.
we want to make. The first is that if a ward member does want to refer a planning application to committee, you won't be required to fill in a pro forma. You simply can submit in writing a request that is brought to committee. And there is a clarification that any application that is simply on a matter of technical appraisal, backed legal opinion, or has a fixed determination period cannot be referred to committee. This is in line with our partner, our neighbouring councils.
Yeah, thank you. The last one, because I did read of that, and to me that makes sense, because we have very recently just had somebody asked me about an application, and I told them that I explained the procedure for getting it called into committee, only to find out later that actually it was a lawful development certificate, which is pointless coming to planning committee because it's just a statement of fact, and therefore I'm happy with that
is
one.
a legal test that goes through, and you would be subject to appeal, because effectively if we've agreed it, then it's because there's fact base to do so.
Okay, everybody happy with those changes? So we'll recommend those all through to council. Okay, so that just leaves...
This just leaves
The
the changes to
procedural
the
rules.
council procedure rules. Please bear with me. So we are proposing changes to 4 of the council procedure rules. The first is questions by members of the public. It is proposed that the changes are made to the rules around questions put by the members of the public, so that the same rules apply to public questions as currently apply to member questions. That is that public questions already need to be delivered to the council on notice, but it is felt that it is now logical that the answers to those public questions are published in advance of the meeting, and members of the public then have the right to ask one supplementary question if they attend the meeting. Further, it's proposed that there's a change to the number of questions that a member of the public can ask. The Constitution currently allows a member of the public to ask one question. However, in practice, chairs of meetings have allowed a lot more than one question to be asked, which means that effectively members of the public now have the right to ask more questions than a member. The proposal is that this is now that public questions are limited to 3 questions per member of the public. This would result in a less disproportionate amount of time being spent on public questions than has currently been the case. This is in line with neighbouring councils.
Do you want us to ask questions on this before we...
I think we might as well do this rule by rule, because
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful.
Anybody got any questions or comments? Councillor Hilton? Yeah.
Well, it seems more sensible than it is at the moment. It works similar to what it does at Shire Hall, where members of the public putting questions in writing, and then they are able to ask supplementary on top of it. So it has been a bit confusing where members of the public would come and then read out the question that's already been put in writing, and then got an answer that's already been put in writing. You really want members of the public to be asked a supplementary and some clarification on probably the answer they first got. I think most people will do 2 or 3 questions anyway, and if it's a number of people that have got some issue they want to raise, then they'll share out the questions anyway. So,
Okay, so is that Rule 10?
That's rule 10.
Okay, so we're happy with the change to Rule 10. Okay. Oh, do you want to say something? No?
I was just going to say, actually, what Jeremy's just said, it aligns it with the county council, and it makes sense, and it'll keep it more structured.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to 11 next.
Rule 11, petitions and deputations from the public. The proposal is that a notice requirement is introduced for petitions and deputations to ensure that a substantive response can be provided at the meeting. For petitions, it's also important to have the information in advance so that officers can ensure that the petition can be dealt with in accordance with the council's petitions scheme. It's also proposed that a further amendment is made to confirm that a ward member can present a petition on behalf of members of the public if the members of the public and petition organisers request it and the member agrees to do so.
Okay. Any questions on that one? No, that seems sensible enough. Yep. So we're happy to recommend that one through. Okay, shall we move on to 12?
Rule 12, questions by members. The first suggested change is required given that there are now more than 3 groups and will ensure that group leader priority for questions to cabinet members is applicable to any number of political groups. The second amendment is to bring the rules in relation to questions to chairs of meetings in line to those with questions to cabinet members. There will be a lower maximum number of questions that can be asked, being 3 questions that can be asked to any chair of a committee, given the narrow remit that they have compared to cabinet members.
Okay, anybody got any questions? As a chair of a committee, I think Councillor Hilton, you've asked me a question once, and I think from memory, Tom, when he chaired ONS, got asked a question once. And did you get asked one for order? Yes, you did, didn't you? Yeah. So are we happy with the changes to Rule 12? Yeah, okay. 13.
Notices on motion on notice. We are proposing quite a number of changes to the provisions around motions on notice. There are currently no limits on either the number or time spent on motions on notice. The Constitution does include a provision for group leaders to select which motions will be called for debate. This is Rule 13.3, but this provision is not being used. Therefore, given the recent increase in the number of motions that have been received, it is suggested that consideration needs to be given to how to best handle motions on notice to ensure that the use of time at council meetings is effective and efficient. In asking you to consider the proposals, we have 2 alternatives that we would like to suggest, and they follow approaches taken by neighbouring authorities. The first is the limit on the number of motions that a single member can move or second, with a suggested limit of 3. Therefore, all motions could be included for debate, or a selection process could be established to decide which motions would need to be debated and in what order. The alternative that's being proposed is a limit on the time available for debating motions, with a suggested limit of 2 hours, and any motion not discussed within the time limit would be deemed void. Motions could be taken in order of receipt, or a selection process again could be established to decide the order. There is Rule 13.5 currently provides for an automatic reference to an alternative decision-making body where a motion is felt better dealt with within a cabinet portfolio or committee. Again, this hasn't been used in practice, so we are asking you whether you consider this rule should be retained, and if so, whether greater consideration needs to be given to whether a motion is appropriate for council or another decision-making body. Yes, Councillor.
The way notices of motions have worked on this council, it's been really good for a number of years, and it's only recently that we've had some members get rather excited and slam in too many notices of motion for a full meeting. So I would be keener I don't like the idea of the group leaders deciding which ones should be done. I think that allows political groups who are larger to affect bully a smaller group or make sure that a smaller group's argument isn't heard, and I don't think we should have that. So I think if you limit it to just 3 motions that a member can either propose or second in that council meeting, that would be the best way forward. And frankly, they should be heard in that order. I don't like the 2-hour time limit. We have it at Shire Hall, and what happens is that motions then get rolled over to the next one, and as soon as the meeting's finished, that motion goes back into the thing, and it means that everybody's putting in motions earlier and earlier in order to make sure that they get their motion on the agenda. Whereas if you know you've got no time limit, you're not worried about putting in a motion for the last minute because you know it's going to be heard. So we try and discipline our group to just 1 or 2 motions per council, and only a third if there is an issue of urgency that's cropped up at the last minute and we think it needs to be heard. But other than that, I think the 3 motion rule per individual for proposing in second would do. get rid of the group leaders' control over it, and just take them in order that they arrive.
Okay, I think I broadly agree with that, rather than the 2 hour cut-off. The other thing is we only have council every 6 or so weeks, don't we? And our motion quite often is time sensitive and therefore completely irrelevant so if it gets ruled. So I agree with Jeremy that the free second to either put or second a motion per member. And then, as Jeremy says, if it's a group, you've got something burning or important to do, it actually will actually make other members in that group maybe stand up and have a go, rather than it always be the same person. Don't know if you want to.
Chair, just through you.
Yeah.
Would members like me to draft that effectively and bring that as a drafted alternative to full council on the 25th? So remove the rule around group leader selection and limit it to 3 motions that can either be proposed or seconded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
And yes, we don't need the 2 hour cut-off then, I don't think. Was that all that was in there, or was there something that
So
else?
we do, I would just like a view on 2 further matters.
Yeah.
One is whether you want the greater use of Rule 13.5, i.e. motions being directed to other committees, cabinet.
No, I don't think that. I think if a member proposes a motion and is seconded, they're expected to debate it at full council. That's the purpose of doing it. There's nothing to stop a proposal or amendment to refer it to a committee. So we can always refer it as part of the vote, but I think it's important that the member has the opportunity to be heard, and rather than have it just passed on.
So for clarity, are you happy that we propose that that rule is deleted? Yeah. And finally, because you have listened to me an awful lot.
Go on. Yeah, I think I'm happy, given it's not been used, and I don't see that we're likely to use it. But was there anything on being a bit more, making sure that the motions are relevant to what the authority
And that was my final question to you all is, Rule 13.7 of the Council Procedure Rules states that where a motion will be ruled out of order if it's not relevant to some matter in relation to which the council has powers or duties or which affects the city. Generally, all motions that are properly received are placed on the agenda at the current time, and it has become more common for the council to debate motions on topics that it has no direct power or influence over, often resulting in a letter being sent to government or another decision-making body, and no substantive action being taken by the council itself. Would members like to give greater consideration to whether motions are of relevance to the powers and duties of the council and whether not to be should be ruled out of order?
Okay.
Yeah, I've thought about this one a lot. And of course, the one that comes to mind is last council we debated Palestine. And I remember 2 years ago we debated Ukraine. And obviously this council doesn't have a foreign policy, if you like. But I think the reason that I would say no to this is that in one manner, we're actually community representatives. And sometimes we feel we have a duty to give a voice, and in particular in the last debate, which was the Palestine thing, and Ukraine as well. Actually, there's a strong Ukrainian community in Gloucester, and it was important to reach out and let them know that we're thinking about them and we support them. So I think there are circumstances when sometimes if there is an overall consensus that we should discuss these things, even though it's not relevant to the council itself, in our role as community representatives. So I wouldn't really be in favour of changing that. I know that there are some circumstances of national policy which maybe not so contentious, maybe that we probably not really achieving much by debating, but I think there are some there have been exceptional circumstances recently where I think it was right that we did. and I'm glad that we did. So I wouldn't really be inclined to change that.
Rule say.
So the current rule is that it's turned to the negative. We will rule out any motion which is not within the direct, or sorry, it doesn't say direct, but it's not within the control or influence of the council.
Okay. Thanks. I'll bring Councillor Hilton in next. Declan, I think you're right. The two that you picked out are ones that we should have debated, but there's been several that it sounds like we've got the power to rule out, but we're just not doing it at the moment. And I do think there needs to be some, some lenience as to whether or not we can debate it or not. And I suspect then really it's up to the chair of council. Is it the chair of council or the group leaders?
It's for the managing director in consultation with the mayor to decide whether a motion is to be ruled out.
Okay, well then maybe it's just that the practice is that the mayor and the get better at doing that, and we just leave the rule as is, because at least we can do it at the moment. But if something comes in that's important to the city that we don't really have any sway over, we can still discuss it. Councillor Hilton.
I thought the basic rules were, and I think this is how I would see it, is that those motions that affect the operation of city council or the issues related to what's happening in Gloucester or even the county for that matter are relevant to the, and then if there are issues which are a matter for the government, it is important that that we can debate those and send a note to the local MP and to the minister saying that we think we support this or we support that or we don't support that. I think the issue is, we wouldn't want to be a motion talking about a piece of public open space in Newcastle is something that would be ruled out of order because it's totally irrelevant to the city, and there's no reason why we would want to comment on it. And I think the rules already cover that. And what I wouldn't want to do is for that motion that we did have on Palestine, that to be ruled out of order. Frankly, it's better to debate those things, because if a member were to put that forward and wasn't able to propose it and debate it, then I think it would tarnish the reputation of the council. So I think it's better to debate those things. And we are then sending a message to the government normally. And I think that's fine. That's how I see the rules and how they should be kept.
Yeah, as I'm the current mayor and chair of the meetings, I think I could be in line with ruling out at the time of the meeting whether it's appropriate or not. Because some of them will not be appropriate. But as Jeremy just said, that was, a serious thing, the Palestine and Israeli war, again with the Ukrainian. And I'm sure that we do want to send a message to the government how we feel and show our support to those communities in our city. But I do think that the mayor and the head of paid service should decide whether a motion is suitable or not. Okay, thank you.
So I'm getting the impression that we leave that part of the rule alone, and it's up to the mayor and head of paid services to actually just implement the rules that they've got. Yeah, okay.
That's all I've got to offer for this evening.
So, thank you. So with Rule 13, then we're basically doing three motions per member, either making or seconding, and then we're not changing anything else. Then are we that you?
No, so if it would be helpful just for me to summarise just all of them. So we've agreed the change to the questions by members of the public. We've agreed the proposals around petitions and deputations by the public. And we've agreed the three motions, either proposed or seconded for each member. We've decided to delete Rule 13.5 around referrals to other committees. That can be done as part of consideration as the motion, as Councillor Hilton has said. And we are going to retain Rule 13.7 and just make sure that the mayor and head of paid service are aware of their role in that.
You've also got two amendments, procedure ones, on page 103 as well. Yeah, we just need to,
Oh, disturbance by the public and recording
Oh, yeah.
meetings, is that?
So these are clearly. Thank you, Councillor Hall. These, again, are just updating the rules to reflect incidents that actually have happened elsewhere rather than here. And we feel it's an opportune time for you to consider them, which are around disruption by members of the public now that we will be webcasting and recording of meetings. And both those are to reflect the current practice that we now have of webcasting. Do you have concerns about the proposed wording?
I have no concerns, no. But I thought
Thank you
we ought to actually be aware of it before we
And I do
move on
apologise.
and accept the recommendation.
Apologies, I had not noted that in my list of things I needed to bring to your attention.
So that's 24 and 25.
Yeah.
And we're happy with the changes to those two as well. Yeah. Okay, so in that case, that's everything for constitutional changes. And I don't have anything else on the agenda, but a date of next meeting evening. So we'll see everybody at council, I guess.
Thank you.